Hello, and welcome to God Calling Vocation Vibes. This is a podcast of episodes about the topic of vocations, conversations with the Little Sisters of the Poor, and with special friends. And today we have several special friends who have attended the Seek conference, and we're going to talk about Seek 25 and how that nurtured their journey with Jesus and what was special about it. But first, let us meet each one. So again, I'm Sister Carolyn. I have with me Sister Maria Catherine, who's joining us from Philadelphia. And then I have Emily and Anna, who are joining us from Catonsville, Maryland. And so let me ask you first to say just a little bit about yourself and maybe a fun fact about yourself. Sister Maria Catherine?
Hello, my name is Sister Maria Catherine. I am stationed at our home in Philadelphia. I've been a little sister for 15 years. Fun fact about myself is I grew up on a dairy farm.
Awesome. All right, Emily?
My name's Emily Kozlowski. I'm a senior studying mechanical engineering at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and I'm also the vice president for Catholic Retrievers, our Catholic campus ministry at UMBC.
Awesome.
A fun fact is that for my capstone project, we're building a 3D printed plane, a remote controlled plane.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. How fascinating. All right. Thank you for joining us, Emily. And Anna.
Hi, I'm Anna Kozlowski. I'm Emily's little sister of 3 years, and I'm a freshman at the Catholic University of America studying theology and social work.
Very good.
And a fun fact for me, and Emily too, is we both can do some small stained glass projects that we like to do with our grandfather when we visit him.
Oh, how
A lot of fun.
precious. Wonderful, wonderful. All right. Well, thank you again for sharing your time with us. And Sister Maria Catherine, for the benefit of viewers and listeners who don't know what the Seek conference is, the annual Seek conference, could you please tell them in a nutshell what it's about before we actually dive in?
Sure. So Seek is it's a conference that happens every year. It's sponsored by the Fellowship of Catholic University Students, which was begun by Curtis Martin about 25 years ago. It's developed over the years into a very large conference that gathers college students from around the country and now around the world to a time where they meet together, hear speakers, and really get to learn more about their faith. It also gives them an opportunity to become missionaries. They can sign up to become missionaries on their campuses, but really just to ignite that flame of their faith and, give them that opportunity to experience one another and to go out and to be missionaries.
And it is an amazing experience. It is very powerful. I've been to a number of the Seek conferences myself. I'd like to introduce to you also our other little sisters who attended this year. The conference was held in 2 locations. It was in Washington, D.C., and we're going to put up the pictures there now. You'll see from left to right, Sister Constance Carolyn, and then Sister Mary Matthew, Sister Maria Catherine, who's with us, and Sister Jeanne. And they attended, of course, in the nation's capital. And then in Salt Lake City, we have a Sister Amy Marie on the left and Sister Joseph Marie on the right. And in a separate picture, we show Sister Mary Jamina. And they attended from different cities where they're stationed and manned a table there in Salt Lake City. And our sisters in Washington circulated among the young people and attended the talks and the adoration and so forth. All right, now for our topic. A few years back, our Holy Father put out a document about the faith, young people, and vocational discernment. And basically, that was about helping each young person discern the vocation to which they are called, not necessarily meaning priests and religious life, although that's a very important option to which God calls people, but from their baptism to see how that is to flourish in the way that they live their life and in the way of life that they choose, which might be marriage, might be religious life, might be single, consecrated life, consecrated virgin, whatever. So this conference is an enormous help to young people in their vocational discernment. And I would like to ask our guests how it helped you in your personal relationship with Jesus, and how it helped you and is helping you on your journey with Jesus. Who wants to go first?
I can go first.
Okay, Emily.
I really like the talks at Seek. The content from the speakers is always really inspiring and definitely provokes more reflection afterwards. So, being able to go to the Adoration Chapel in between talks and in free time, and then to have the big group adoration, particularly Sister Miriam's talk led into the big group adoration, and that was probably one of my favorite things. And I think the other component that is really special is getting to do it surrounded by a group of other young people. And especially, we brought a lot of people from my campus. And so
Yes.
just being outside of that normal day-to-day campus life, and getting to have those conversations and, yeah, just grow those deeper bonds. That was a highlight for me. So taking that forward and just having yeah, a lot to reflect on from
Yes.
the content and from those conversations.
Yes, and it's so exciting that you're active in leadership in your Catholic campus ministry there. And what a joy it must have been for you to see the other students benefiting so beautifully. And you've come to know each other so well through the school year. And to have all those extra graces just poured upon you as a group attending. And Anna, please tell us, what were some of the main highlights that really touched you? And what has especially helped you in your relationship with Jesus and on your journey with him?
I agree with a lot of what Emily said. There are so many excellent parts of the conference that make it such a great experience. I think the talks in particular, that's a very big part of the conference and how you spend your time there. And there are just some excellent speakers. And looking back on my notes from the weekend, I see more and more things that I'd already forgotten, but are just like, wow, those are good takeaways. But I think in particular, there were a couple talks that stood out, but Rachel Bowman gave a talk on the speed of life and how we need to slow down to hear the Lord, and that she said love is a slow speed. And so she was just kind of talking about how we as young people and just in life in general, but it's easy to just keep moving through your day to day, trying to fit in all the things. There's only 24 hours. But she talked a lot about how it's important to be intentional with how you're spending your time and where you're placing it. And I just found that very helpful. Just starting college and getting adjusted to everything. It was good to hear and good to reflect about how to be intentionally spending my time, especially with the Lord, and the ways that can transform your relationship with him, and how to
Yes.
take your faith to the next step through that. So
Yes.
that was one that stuck with me.
It's, just like Mary pondered all these things in her heart, and so the things that we've heard at Seek or elsewhere that have been spiritually nourishing for us, sometimes we do forget them for a moment, but then the Holy Spirit awakens those thoughts and those movements of the heart again, and they really continue to nourish us even when we kind of feel like we fell asleep at the wheel. But if we try to stay open to the Lord, he does continue to nourish us with those graces. And I feel so happy that we have a young person who's at the beginning of her college years and a young person who's at the end of her college years, going to graduate this semester. How exciting. And to see how important the faith is to both of them and where they are on their faith journey and how the conference helped them. And I'm sure in a few years, if you go to the Seek conference, it'll help you in new ways, and you'll perceive some of the fruits that have flourished because of this conference. Sister Maria Catherine, what were some of the highlights for you at the conference?
Couple of things. Perhaps the most striking was the Eucharistic adoration this year. We were in a smaller scale in Washington, D.C., but it was just very humbling to be in the room. Like, it would be packed where we had, and then, you would see priests, bishops, religious, young people all filing in at the same time, and just to have that awareness of everybody is adoring the Lord together. And seeing, I just struck by how many of the priests and bishops were in there for a long time. That was one striking. The other perhaps the talk that stayed with me was a talk by Dr. Jonathan Reyes on transforming our minds and putting on the mind of Christ, and just speaking to the fact of how we need to transform our minds and be ever aware of what we're taking in, as far as media is concerned, who we're listening to, and are we taking the time and that intentionality again too of, you know, am I forming my mind according to the church? And, you know, like, because we're bombarded continually by so many images and noise throughout the day, regardless of where we find ourselves. And so taking that time to really immerse ourselves in scripture and in the doctrine of the church. So that was, he spoke very well. I actually went to a separate little session that he gave, and then he also gave one of the keynotes in the evening. So that for me were two of the highlights from my SEEK conference.
Yes. And in our Rule of Life as Little Sisters of the Poor, the chapter on the spiritual life, there's a lot of emphasis on this transformation that we enter into the sentiments of Jesus Christ. It's not practicing this virtue and that virtue and that virtue, but we want to put on the mind of Christ. We want to transform our hearts into the heart of Christ. And Anna, what you said about the intentionality and, you know, dedicating this time and what you spend your time on, actually, all three of you spoke on that some. I think that it's amazing that so many thousands and thousands of young people dedicated this time, which was part of their Christmas break, which, you know, they call winter break, but I still call it Christmas break because it's in honor of Jesus. And so many young people of faith and even not of faith take the time to dedicate these 5 days to be at the SEEK conference, to set all their other interests and pursuits aside, and school, everything that, you know, makes demands upon them, and they set this time aside so they can focus really on their relationship with the Lord. And doesn't that make them more beautiful for family and for school and for friendships and for all that lies ahead for their vocational discernment? So kudos to all of you young people. All right, so this is God Calling Vocation Vibes. It's conversations with the Little Sisters of the Poor on the topic of vocations. And today we are talking about the SEEK conference. So we are doing the episode Sisters and Seekers 25. And we have our guests with us, Sister Maria Catherine, who's joining us from Philadelphia, and Emily and Anna, who are joining us from Catonsville, Maryland. So the next thing I would like to shift our conversation to is Mission Way, where there are exhibit tables at the conference of many different religious orders, religious sisters, religious brothers, priests, and you also see them circulating among all the booths and the open spaces and in the talks. There's just a great presence of consecrated people. And I'm wondering how that touched you when you saw that. How does that impact you when you see many beautiful young people, not much older than yourselves, giving their lives to God as priest brothers and sisters? Emily, what was your thought as you saw that, and did you interact with any of them?
Yes, there were definitely two interactions that particularly stood out to me. Of course, there were a lot of religious in Mission Way, but especially at lunch, you would see a lot of sisters and priests walking around and just settling themselves with different groups. We were, eating lunch on the floor in the hallways, and they just came over. And there was one sister in particular who talked with a group of 10 or 15 of the women from UMBC. And it was great to just be able to talk to her, and she shared a lot about her day-to-day life, and especially what that transition was like for her to go from thinking that she wanted to get married and have kids to then actually opening up to the idea of a religious vocation, and how she found a lot of peace in that, and then what that looked like to grow into that role during her formation, and how to get used to kind of the lifestyle. And she had some funny stories about kind of the idiosyncrasies of living as a sister, and how their particular order, they ask for donations for food a lot. And so she had some funny stories about trying to make a meal out of beets and like flour, and but it was just nice to hear from like a real person and about her real lived experience. And she was very friendly and open to all sorts of questions. So that made for a really good lunchtime conversation with her. And the second one that I think Anna could maybe speak more to is one of our teachers from high school, Sister Mary Madeline. She's a Dominican sister. And we had a long conversation with her one night, which was really neat because she was giving the women's talk the next morning. But I didn't, as that was one of Anna's favorite talks, I'll let you speak more to that, Anna.
All right.
Yeah, that was something I was gonna touch on. It was so good to see all of the different orders. It's always fun to see so many different orders together and see how many habits you don't recognize. Um, but yeah, and it was cool to see them all together and kind of start to see how different charisms of the different orders come into play, which, is just in this conference, you don't see everything, of course, but hearing a Jesuit priest give a talk on discernment, or yeah, Sister Mary Madeline's talk, or the Sisters of Life and their talks that they gave. But Sister Mary Madeline, as Emily was saying, gave one of my favorite talks, and it was on the vocation of women and saying yes to what he calls us to. And it was just really cool to hear from her, and she was so straightforward about these conversations, and conversations that often can feel confusing, or young people feel lost, or just kind of vague ideas of discernment, but that there's practical steps that can be taken, and that like you don't have to be afraid of the future, really, because God is leading us all through very gently. But getting to talk to her the night before was so good too, and just like kind of seeing the person behind the people giving the talks is just a joy, and to see the joy of the sisters and the priests and brothers was really lovely.
I think another thing that stuck out from that conversation is that she was saying how she's good friends with Sister Miriam and how they love to pray for each other, and that they can relate to being sisters, but also having this more public presence of giving these talks and yeah, being figures who appear at these conferences. So that was also really neat to see because they're also from different orders, but how they
Yes.
can build that relationship, and you don't
Yes.
really get that behind the scenes sort of view all the time.
That's right. And we're all sisters to one another. We, little sisters of the poor, and the other religious families that we interact with, we love one another. We pray for one another. We help one another any way we can. And all of us rejoice every time a young woman or a young man enters a religious community and says yes to a religious vocation or to a priestly vocation. It's a joy for all of us. We are one family, even though we all have our different charisms. And you pointed out very well about how when you have a meal with a sister in an informal environment, you get a feel for the charism. And, a lot of times people think charism is the work we do, but charism is not the work we do that's embraced in the charism. But you get a feel for that spirit and how they live, who they are. And each community's charism is different, but there's nothing like visiting sisters, spending time with sisters or brothers, if you're a young man, and imbibing the charism. And that's how you know if there's a chance maybe this is for you. So you both said that so very well. And Sister Maria Catherine, what's your thought on that?
I think it's always encouraging to be out on Mission Way and just to see all the different religious that are there. It's a support and it's an encouragement in my own vocation. And what's fun too is like when you go to different conferences, I was able to speak this year with a Redemptorist priest who actually taught us when we were postulants, and he's the vocation director now. I've ran into him a few years ago at Seek as well. But just to see that, and, to be able to speak with him, I don't obviously see him very often. But then to see other sisters, and, you see different sisters who maybe you knew, or I've even run into old friends who entered religious communities, and, we don't keep up contact on a regular basis. So it's always, just an encouragement to be able to see the others and encourage one another.
Yes, yes. And Emily, what would be your advice for a young man or woman who wants to grow in their relationship with Christ and wants to grow on their journey with him, even if they don't have a sense yet of what their vocation might be, do you have some advice for them?
I think there were two big things for me. So I definitely grew a lot in my faith during college. And one of the big things was just finding a community. And so Catholic Retrievers has been amazing and we've grown a lot in the past few years, but it's a really special way to be surrounded by people who have kind of the same end goal of getting holier and growing a relationship with Jesus. And that is so important, especially in college when there's a lot more freedom and a lot more decisions to make about how you're going to live your life. So having that support of a community and those deep friendships where you're headed the same direction, that was really important for me. And having kind of the mentorship of our campus minister to help guide as someone who has more experience in like developing a faith life. So that was one aspect. And I think the other one is, I think everyone would tell you, just a prayer life, but I didn't really know how to pray, like mental prayer, going into college. And so like learning to do that and learning to practice that more and learning how to hear Jesus' voice that was the big change, I think, for me. And that happened in college. So it's definitely a good time to start diving more into that.
Yes. And you hear a lot of talk about how so many young people drift away from faith in college, drift away from any relationship with the Lord, from their practice of their religion, whatever. And yet there are such beautiful stories of miracles that happen. We visit college campuses quite a bit, and how often have we witnessed young people coming to faith because the example of prayerful and enthusiastic fellow campus ministry members who love their faith and love the Lord, and it has an influence. So you all are missionaries without being necessarily focus missionaries, which are the missionaries who lead the Focus Conference, but you all are missionaries for one another, and that's what the church calls us to be. And how about you, Anna? What would be your advice to a young person who desires to grow in closeness to Christ and to walk faithfully with him?
I second everything Emily said. She was right on. I think in particular, trying to find a mentor to just to talk with and have conversations about someone that you trust and can feel comfortable asking the big questions is really helpful. And to let you know that, you're on the right track and keep guiding you. So that's one. I think two, just also similar to what Emily said, but just to be brave in your prayer life. And the first step in learning to hear the Lord's voice is to trust that he wants to speak to you and that he will speak in a way that you can understand. And that's scary if you haven't experienced that before. It's scary to take that leap without knowing if he will or if he won't. But just to take that step in trust is big, and he'll honor that and he'll bless it and work through it. And it just takes time and consistency.
That's a great point. He loves us so much, and he does desire to spend time with us, to speak to our hearts, and to listen to us, to listen to what's on our hearts. So praise God for those insights. You two are just amazing. And of course, Sister Maria Catherine, you're amazing. You're my little sister. So Sister Maria Catherine, I'm going to ask you what advice you have for a young person who desires to grow closer to Christ, but in particular for young women or men who might be discerning a religious vocation. What would be your advice for them?
So I'm going to say that the two, Emily and Anna, both gave excellent answers, which are fundamental. And I would second that as well, what you said, community, finding other young people that have the same goal in mind. That's, that support, whether that's your friends, whether that's family, to make sure you have that. I would say spending time in prayer, especially Eucharistic adoration, going to Mass, participating in the sacraments. For somebody, a young woman who's thinking about religious life, take that step and go look for a community, a religious community, and, take that time, get to know the sisters, spend time if you think you might have a vocation in a particular religious community. You know, it may not be that particular one, but it won't hurt to spend time and get to know them. It's also beneficial to seek some sort of spiritual direction, whether that's with a trusted mentor, a priest, or a religious sister who's going to help you to make, you know, in your discernment in that respect. But I think the main thing is whatever time you give to the Lord in prayer, in giving that, you know, I say I'm going to discern for, 6 months, whatever time you give to the Lord, he's not going to let you down, and he will not be outdone in generosity. Whether he leads you to religious vocation or not, you're never going to regret having spent that time with him.
Thank you very much, Sister Maria Catherine. And now, before we close, I would like to have us pause and want to hear a witness that 2 of the young women who participated in the Sikh conference in Salt Lake City wanted to offer about the witness of religious sisters before them at the conference.
Here, what do you think of so many sisters here?
I love sisters. I am on in all of them. I want them to be my friends, all my friends.
I think it's beautiful to see the
Yeah.
call to religious life and people being so devoted. I love sisters as well.
Yeah.
I love meeting religious life, so I'm fond to see different.
Yeah.
And what are you seeking here at Seek 25?
I want a meek and humble heart like Jesus.
I think I want more humility and compassion, like Jesus.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
God bless you.
Thank
God
you.
bless you.
And now, as we prepare to conclude our podcast episode, I want to thank all 3 of you for participating. You've just been amazing, and we're so grateful. I want to ask those of you who are watching or listening to please consider liking, sharing, and following the podcast, because if you do that, the algorithms will help put it before the eyes of more discerning young men and women, and you can be an ambassador for vocations for the church and the kingdom. So please consider doing that. And I also want to invite you to come back with us when we have our next episode. We are going to have Emily Savage from Fiat Ministries and Sister Bernadette Rose, a little sister of the poor, who has participated in a number of those retreats with young women, tell about the beauties of that particular time with the Lord as it's structured in a Fiat retreat. Just an amazing experience, a low pressure, filled with grace experience. So be sure and join us then. That'll be in about 2 weeks. In the meantime, Sister Maria Catherine and Anna and Emily and I all promise you our prayers for your vocation, and that it may be filled with joy as you yourself journey with Jesus along the path to which he has called you. May that path be blessed.